Hello there. On behalf of SysGrip and the planning team, I had the pleasure of welcoming you to Aware for All Northeast. My name is Hope Vendraselli, and I am the Manager of Events and Community Engagement with SysGrip. SysGrip, or the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, is a nonprofit organization that educates the public about clinical research. We do not conduct trials or recruit for trials, but we believe that everyone should have the information they need to be informed about clinical research. To make sure that this program is a meaningful educational experience for you, we ask for your feedback. We will have 7 poll questions pop up on your screen throughout the program. These questions will also be your raffle tickets at the end of the program. So let's start with an easy question to test out the poll feature. I am participating in the webinar as someone interested in learning about participating in clinical trials or a professional involved or associated with clinical trials. You will have 30 seconds to answer each poll question that pops up throughout the program. If you have any questions throughout the event, please shoot us a message in the chat box. Our team will bring up any questions you may have during the Q&A portion. Our ability to live long, healthy lives is due in large part to advances in medical treatments, advances that would not have been possible without the participation of volunteers in clinical trials. I also want to take this moment to acknowledge any of our audience members who have participated in clinical research. We thank you for your important contribution to advance medical science and health for all of us. At the close of our program, we would like to recognize these study volunteers, or as we like to call them, medical heroes, with a special ceremony. SysGrip was honored to collaborate on this program with many community and research organizations. These groups help to spread the word about the AWARE program. You can visit many of these groups in our Informational Exhibit Center by clicking on the link in the Resource tab at the bottom of your screen, or by clicking the image directly below the media player. You can revisit the Informational Exhibit Center whenever you'd like, and we also invite you to save the dates that are up on the slides now for upcoming programs in other regions of the country that you may wish to share with your friends or family. This information will also be available in the follow-up email that you'll receive after the program. I would like to recognize our planning team. For the last few months, these dedicated individuals have helped to organize today's virtual event. Without your help and support, this program would not have been possible. We would now like to thank our generous Aware for All sponsors, all of whom have contributed funds and support to make this program free and accessible to all. A very special thank you to the Aware Industry Consortium, Biogen, CSL Behring, EMD Serono, Genentech, IQVIA, Janssen, Novartis, Otsuka, Pfizer, and WCG for providing support to bring this educational program to 5 regions this year, to our national sponsor, the Allergy and Asthma Network, and to our in-kind and outreach supporters and exhibitors as seen on the screen now. Thank you to all for your continued support of this educational program. In just a moment, I'll turn it over to Dr. Carmen Guerra, who will provide an overview of clinical research. But before that, I'd like to share a video which shows what pharmacy shelves would look like without clinical trials. Then we will host a panel discussion with study volunteers and research professionals, sharing information about their roles in the clinical research process. After that, our friends with Johns Hopkins Lyme Disease Research Center will share some tips and tricks for tick and Lyme disease safety. We encourage you to send in your questions through the chat box or by emailing awareforall@sysgrip.org. We'll open for a Q&A directly following the panel discussion. And finally, we will conclude with our Med Hero ceremony and host our raffle. So let's get started. To follow along with Dr. Guerra, you can download the digital handbook from our Resource Center at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and you'll also receive a link to download the handbook after the event. Poll question number 1 should have just popped up on your screens. How would you rate your knowledge of clinical research? You'll have 30 seconds to answer. Again, the question is, how would you rate your knowledge of clinical research? And don't forget that by answering these questions, your name will be entered into a raffle at the end of the program.
Are you open?
Yes, we are. Welcome to the MT Pharmacy. There's nothing on the shelves because we wanted to show what modern medicine would be like without clinical trials.
Hi, my name's Lester, and since I can remember, my mother she has diabetes, and she's been fighting it for years.
Clinical trials are medical research studies involving patients. They can help discover new medicines or get improved versions of existing medicines.
My brother was diagnosed with appendix cancer at the age of 46. The type of tumor that he has is called a signet ring cell carcinoma. I think there's only like a very small percentage of people in the United States that have survived from it. That type of cancer, I would really love for there to be a cure for.
Clinical trials help us find out if a treatment can work in patients. We'd like to fill these shelves a bit like how clinical trials fill the shelves in a regular pharmacy.
For Teddy.
I use 7 boxes because I put down pills for different reasons. I use HIV and AIDS because that's been out here for a long time.
I picked cancer for my box because my mother was a victim of cancer. She died of the year 2008. I was the age of 9 years old.
I never really thought about clinical trials. I guess I just thought it was for people who had cancer or something serious like that.
I think this is a good concept. I think it gets people talking.
I've actually never thought about the fact that without clinical trials, we wouldn't have any of the medicines that we take every single day.
It is my sincere pleasure to welcome Dr. Carmen Guerra, Associate Professor of Medicine at the Perlman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania.
Hello, my name is Dr. Carmen Guerra, and I'm an Associate Professor of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania and Associate Director of Diversity and Outreach for the Abramson Cancer Center of the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome to Aware for All Northeast. We're thrilled to have so many of you joining us today to learn more about clinical research. This program is brought to you by the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, or the SCRIP, with the support from local organizations. Our goal is to help you understand the clinical research process, including the risks and benefits of participating in clinical research. Have you ever taken an allergy medication or a pain reliever? If so, you can thank clinical research participants. Around the world, people are living longer and healthier lives because of the selfless individuals who take part in clinical research trials. These trials help find ways to prevent, treat, and even cure certain medical conditions. We like to call the participants medical heroes. At CISCRIP, we believe that study volunteers are important partners in the research process. That's why our motto is education before participation. Partnerships work best when everyone understands the overall goal and what may be expected of them and how they are protected throughout the process. This includes clinical researchers too. The information medical experts learn from clinical trials improves public health and can even save lives. And it all starts with these questions. How does a disease progress? And how can it be prevented? How well does a new drug work or not work? Is there a better way to treat disease? Does where people live affect their health? Researchers can only answer these questions with the help of clinical research participants. A clinical trial is a carefully designed study in which a participant may be asked to take a new drug or treatment so that researchers can answer a specific medical question. These are questions like, is a treatment safe? Does it improve a certain medical condition? Does it have side effects? How much should people take? Is it any better than the medicines that already are available? Because researchers are studying new treatments, there are risks to participants in a clinical trial. However, something valuable is always learned from clinical research studies that improve public health and can potentially lead to game-changing treatments. It's important to understand that being in a clinical trial is not the same as going to your doctor for care. When you go to your doctor, they'll give you a treatment that has already been tested and approved by the government. This is called routine or standard of care. You can't fully understand something by studying just one group of people. Gender, age, and ethnicity affect the way that people respond to disease and treatments. For example, Alzheimer's disease happens twice as often in women than in men. Type 2 diabetes and asthma are more common in people who are Black or of African descent. Hispanic, Asian, and white women are more likely to develop osteoporosis. For many years, most clinical trials included white men only. That meant that the information collected in those trials was not complete and could not tell us how treatments affected other groups. But today, clinical trials welcome the participation of all people, and they are closely monitored for their safe and ethical treatment. Today, health professionals are more aware than ever of the need to have diverse populations in clinical research. As a community, we are taking steps to break down barriers to participation, improve diversity, and pave the way to a healthier future for everyone. Several studies have shown that underrepresented minority populations consistently demonstrate a high willingness to participate in clinical research studies. Individuals within these communities have said that the lack of access to clinical trials is the primary reason why they don't participate. This includes outreach and communications that failed to reach them, health and research professionals not asking them to participate, clinical trials that are too far away, and participation requirements that are too difficult to follow. You may remember past abuses, like the Tuskegee syphilis study, in which treatment was withheld from Black men for many years, or the story of Henrietta Lacks and what are now known as HeLa cells, one of the most commonly used cell lines in scientific research. These studies experimented on patients without their consent and were not compensated for their participation. Today, federal guidelines and ethical practices are in place to monitor the safety and to protect the rights of trial participants. If we work together, we can solve these problems and make clinical trials far more accessible. Let's talk a bit about how clinical trials move forward and how long it typically takes to advance a new treatment. Clinical trials begin with a small number of participants. The goal of this is to learn about how safe a new treatment is. Next, clinical trials recruit larger numbers of participants to test how well the treatment works and help researchers learn about its safety. This part can take several years. Researchers continue to study treatments after they have been approved. These trials usually involve large numbers of participants. In these trials, researchers look at real-world experience and check to see if the treatment works well over a long period of time. You probably have heard a lot in the news lately about the development of vaccines and treatments for COVID-19. Vaccines and treatments for infectious diseases usually take 10 years or more to develop. This seems like a long time, but it is necessary for the understanding if a treatment is safe and effective at specific dosage levels. However, the clinical trial process for the COVID-19 treatments and vaccines is moving at a faster pace and may produce promising therapies in only a few years. Some treatments and vaccines have a head start, and they are based on research that was conducted for viruses that are similar to the COVID-19. The pandemic has mobilized much higher levels of coordination between companies and government agencies, which helps to speed up the process. Clinical trials can be sponsored by government, academic medical centers, pharmaceutical companies, biotechnology companies, or medical device companies. Clinical trial research requires many different people, each of whom is critical to the process. Like the members of a sports team, clinical trials have coaches, players, and referees, and each person has an important role to play. The principal investigator is like the head coach of the team. They are responsible for organizing and leading the trial, as well as recording and analyzing the data. Like a head coach, the PI follows a playbook, which is called the protocol. The protocol is a set of instructions that everyone on the team must follow. The research staff members are like assistant coaches who help the PI. The clinical research coordinator handles the day-to-day activity at the research site. They work closely with the PI and are the main contact for participants. Organizers that help protect the safety of participants are called referees.
The referees make sure that teams follow the rules, review the trial before it starts, and keep participants safe. The number and type of referees involved in a trial depends on the trial being conducted. Each clinical trial is reviewed, approved, and supervised by an important local ethics committee. The committee makes sure a trial is ethical and fair and that there is not too much risk for participants. During the trial, researchers must let the committee know if there are any changes to the trial plan, or if the participant experiences serious injuries or side effects. The ethics committee can end a trial if it feels the participants are not safe. Referees from the federal government are also involved. Agencies like the FDA or the European Medicines Agency reviews trials and inspect research centers and monitor research groups to make sure they are following federal guidelines. These agencies had the final say in whether or not a treatment is approved. Now let's talk about the most important members of the team, the trial participants. Participants are like the players on the field. Without them, clinical research cannot happen. We need all different types of people to participate in clinical research. Research can include sick or healthy participants. Your friends and family can be the support system while you are taking part in a trial. They can help you come up with questions to ask your doctor. In the end, it is your job to make the final decision if you will participate in the trial. Everyone has a chance to participate in research. You just have to find the clinical trial that is right for you. Just like in sports, clinical trials have eligibility criteria. These are guidelines that indicate who can or cannot be in the trial. Eligibility criteria ensure that the clinical trial is studying the right people under the right conditions. If you are considering a trial, be honest with the researchers about your health. Lying or hiding information to get into a trial could endanger your safety and harm the research. Okay, let's assume the coaches say you're eligible to play. The next question you have to ask yourself is, do I choose to play? You cannot say whether or not you want to participate without understanding the rules of the game. What are your responsibilities as a player? How long will the game last? What are the risks and benefits of playing? The informed consent process is designed to answer all these questions and is required by the FDA and local ethics committee. Informed consent is one of the most important parts of research, and it is a term you're going to hear a lot. Remember that informed consent is an ongoing process throughout the whole trial, not a single event. If you decide you are interested in participating in a trial, the trial staff will go through the informed consent form and you ask any questions at any time. Before you can participate in a trial, you must read, understand, and sign the informed consent form. It is important to note that you don't have to review the informed consent form in English if there's another language that you prefer to speak. If you participate in a clinical trial, you have rights. You have the right to understand the purpose, benefits, risks, and side effects of the clinical trial. You have the right to ask questions and discuss your concerns. It's important for participants to ask questions until they fully understand the trial. Most importantly, you have the right to quit the trial at any time for any reason. The research staff will help you do this safely. Deciding to take part in a clinical trial is a personal decision. What's right for you may not be right for someone else. Researchers set up their studies so that their trial will be fair. They also want their research to be accurate and unbiased. They don't want their own ideas about what they think should happen in a trial to influence the results. To set up fair studies, participants may be randomly split into different trial groups. In this case, the researcher and the participant do not get to decide which group the participants will be in. This is called randomized clinical trials. Sometimes the participants do not know which treatment they are receiving. When the participants or researchers in a clinical study both do not know which treatment each participant gets, it's called blinding. In some trials, researchers will use a placebo. A placebo looks like the trial treatment, but does not have any medicine in it. Sometimes the placebo is referred to as a sugar pill. What's interesting is that even though a placebo has no medicine in it, there are times when people who are taking a placebo improve or feel better during the trial. This is called the placebo effect. Deciding to participate in a clinical trial is a personal decision. Here are some of the reasons you might consider getting involved in trials. To get access to new medications that are not publicly available. To advance science and help others who have the same condition as you. To receive free and close health monitoring. Some, but not all, clinical trials will pay for travel costs and for the time and commitment. Amounts may vary. The benefits are in addition to the help you will provide for health research. Of course, all research involves risks. There can be physical risks. A sick participant may not get better. They may feel uncomfortable or their symptoms may get worse. There is an emotional risk. The trial can be demanding and participation may be stressful. Financially, there may be out-of-pocket costs such as childcare or missing work. And when you agree to participate in research, you are giving permission for researchers to collect information about you. Participation takes time and effort. You can work with the trial staff to try to accommodate your schedule. The trial may end early. Even if you want to continue to participate, your doctor, the referees, or the company making the new drug can stop the trial at any time. Unfortunately, many participants drop out of studies because they don't fully understand what they are signing up for. Here are some tips if you are in a trial. Do your homework. Read all the instructions provided by the trial staff. You can even go online to learn about the potential treatment being studied. Take your time. There is absolutely nothing wrong with asking a researcher to slow down. Ask questions. Bring up any concerns with the trial staff, your doctor, and your friends and family. Bring a friend or a family member to ask questions too. If you decide to join a trial, you should feel confident that you have made an informed choice. You should feel comfortable that the clinical trial staff will support you and answer all of your questions. There are lots of things to consider when you decide to participate in a clinical trial. Today's presentation is an important first step. Now it's up to you to learn more about clinical trials. The best place to start is with your doctor. You can also get information from local research centers, disease advocacy groups, and conferences. You can also find more information in the SysScript booth in the Information Exhibit Center. Clinical research participants truly are medical heroes, without whom medical science cannot move forward. On behalf of all of us at SysScript, thanks to the millions of people who give the gift of participation in clinical trials each year, and to the rest of us who admire them for doing so. We appreciate you taking the time today to learn about the clinical research process, and we strongly encourage you to share what you've learned with your friends, family, and people throughout your community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guerra. So I thought that we could just run through a couple of the questions that we've been getting in from our audience so far. And one that's been sent in is, how do you determine if a clinical trial is right for you? Do you have any advice that you would like to share with somebody who's considering getting involved with the trial?
Well, thank you for that lovely question. Deciding on whether a clinical trial is right for you is based on a conversation between you and the doctor, or the doctor and his team or her team. It involves asking what is required if I participate in a clinical trial. And that can include, how many visits will I have to make? Will I have to pay any expenses related to a clinical trial? In some cases, you might have to travel to attend those additional visits. And with that travel comes along expenses such as gas or tolls or parking, and finding out if there is potentially reimbursement for travel-related expenses may help you make those decisions. So it starts with a conversation about what is required of you, and that way you can make the decision whether you can participate in a trial to better treat your condition. In addition, you may want to ask, what are the benefits? Will this trial actually help my disease? In some cases, the doctors may not know, but some of the benefits may include closer observation and additional testing that will be done to learn more about the condition or disease that you have.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I know that we alluded to in some of the slides, and something that's really important to us at SysGroup, as well as many of our audience members, is the importance of diversity in trials. And we often say that health is not one size fits all. So what are some things that are really important, especially over at the University of Pennsylvania, in order to really reach those diverse populations and get them more involved with clinical research?
So that's a wonderful question, and one that I'm really passionate about, because I've spent a large portion of my career helping individuals who are diverse access cancer clinical trials. And what we've learned is that making a purposeful outreach to those communities to bring information to them in ways they can understand and in ways that are culturally relevant, that really address those cases where sometimes the rights of participants were violated, and really talk about those conversations that happen in trials like the Tuskegee and the Henrietta Lacks situation, and really answer hard questions. How did we let this happen? And another hard question is, will we allow this to happen in the future? And so for me, it's been really eye-opening to hear that these concerns still linger to this day, and rightly so. In healthcare, we haven't earned our trustworthiness. And so we generally help our participants better understand what are the ways that we protect their rights. So we've developed several programs, including a clinical trials ambassador program, where individuals who are themselves diverse from underrepresented minority populations, we teach them a whole curriculum about cancer clinical trials. And then they help us educate communities. And that's the way that you can deliver education that is appropriate, both from a literacy and cultural perspective, to help others learn this important information so that they can make the decision that's right for them.
Thank you. And, we mentioned how long it can take to make a vaccine, but scientists have been working on the mRNA vaccines for many, many years, correct? Especially the ones you work with at the University of Pennsylvania.
That's right. And that's a topic that's very close and dear to the hearts of everyone at the University of Pennsylvania, because we have the scientists there who actually developed a lot of the technology that went into the new mRNA vaccines. Dr. Drew Weissman and Katalin Koniko spent over a decade trying to develop this technology that now we use in the COVID vaccines, this mRNA technology. And they talk about how they spent over a decade running into problems of how to make this technology work in human beings. And so for them, it was not a slow process at all. They've been working on this technology for over 10 years, which is why at the point when we needed a vaccine for COVID-19, we were able to harness years and years of work to really help us successfully develop a vaccine.
Thank you again, Dr. Guerra. We appreciate you providing a foundation of information about clinical research. And we will open for more questions right after our panel discussion. So I want to encourage you again to share any questions with us through that chat box or by emailing awareforall@sysgroup.org. So here we have poll question number 2. Have you ever participated in a clinical trial? Thank you for answering. Poll question number 3 is now up on your screens, and we're testing your knowledge after Dr. Guerra's presentation. So true or false, responses to medicines can vary depending on a number of factors, including somebody's genetic background, ethnicity, sex, and lifestyle. And that's why scientists need to have diverse representation in clinical trials. And we're going to follow that up with question number 4, another true or false. An institutional review board's role is to make sure that the study is ethical and the rights and welfare of participants are protected. As we move on to our panel portion of the program, I want to remind everybody of our chat box. It's a great way to interact with our speakers and ask them and our team any questions you may have about clinical research. So next, I would like to welcome Betash Bahadur, the Associate Director of Relationship Management and Development at CISPR, who will be moderating our panel discussion, as well as our speakers, study participant Donna Matlach, study participant Colleen Ziegler, Dr. Christian Ramirez Martinez, Clinical Research Enrollment Manager at Columbia, Cathi Thomas, Program Director of the Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorder Center at Boston University Medical Center and Coordinator of the American Parkinson's Disease Association INR Center, Jamie Hood, Senior Manager, Clinical Strategy and Innovation at EMD Serono, and Rodney Winley, Senior Director of R&D Patient Partnerships at CSL Behring.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this panel discussion about clinical research. And I'd like to thank very much all of our panel participants today. I'll introduce each of them here in a second, and we'll hear from them as far as what their interaction is with clinical research, what their role is. And they represent a pretty diverse group of individuals as far as the different interactions that they've had with research. So maybe we can get started here. I'll call on Donna Matlach, who is a past clinical trial participant. Donna, could you just give us a very quick introduction of yourself and your experience with clinical research?
Sure. My name is Donna Matlach, and I live in Arizona. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, but because of my asthma, I had to move to Arizona permanently. One of my triggers was the cold weather, so that's why we moved out here. I have severe asthma. It took from 2007. I had it as a child. It went away. And then in 2007, I had bronchitis, and it reared its head in a severe bronchial, episode with, all kinds of steroids and medications. But it has progressed to the point where after several years, I had 3 near fatal episodes, as well as many hospitalizations. So my doctor finally, after we traveled the country, I've seen about 7 doctors, and they all couldn't figure out what was going on. And then some of them told me I needed to see a psychiatrist. But that being said, my doctor in Pittsburgh, UPMC, said, what do you think about a clinical trial? I said, I'll do anything. I had been to so many doctors, so many hospitals. Whatever they tested me for was fine, even if sometimes it had nothing to do with asthma. So as soon as she said clinical trial for a medication, I said yes, because I had been turned down for a medication by insurance. They said it wasn't necessary. So they kept giving me the step therapy with prednisone. So I went on the clinical trial and got the placebo. And then they decided that they were going to give me the real thing. So it took about 2.5 years. I flew from Arizona to California every month at my own cost for this clinical trial, but it saved my life. I can't imagine my life without this medication and the opportunity to do it. And I'm so thankful that there are clinical trials out there for people like myself, no matter what their disease is or, what their issue is. But I'm so thankful for it. And that's basically a little bit of my story. It's a little more involved, but that's kind of just an overview.
Thank you so much, Donna, for sharing that with us. Why don't we go over to Colleen Ziegler?
Colleen Ziegler, I live in Rochester, New York. And 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. I'm a non-smoker, and it came as quite a shock to receive that diagnosis. I had been sick for about 15 months with various respiratory symptoms. And it wasn't until I woke up one night coughing up blood that I ended up in the emergency room. Knowing that my prognosis was very poor when I was first diagnosed, it was 3 to 6 months. I decided to seek out a clinical trial. I'd worked in the pharma industry for about 22 years, and I had also had breast cancer. So I understood the value of a clinical trial, and I began searching for one. That search brought me to Boston, also brought me to appointments at MD Anderson and Sloan. But once I got to Boston, I never went any further. I'm being treated at MGH. I'm in a clinical trial, a phase 3. I'm on the study drug, and I'm approaching 6-year survival. Yeah. So I go to Boston. I'm going now every 12 weeks since last March, but for the first 5 years, I went every 8 weeks. And as Donna said, it was at my own expense. But again, I really felt that a clinical trial was going to provide me with the greatest opportunity for survival. And it has. And the trial that I'm on, the study drug, was approved for first-line treatment about maybe a year and a half after I had been on the trial. If I hadn't gone on the trial, I could have gone on standard of care, which would have been okay. But because my cancer had metastasized to my brain, it really prevented me from entering any other clinical trials at the time.
Thank you, Colleen, for sharing that. And for some of the folks who maybe are new to clinical research in the audience, what Colleen is describing is not uncommon, because some of the restrictions, some of the qualifications for folks who need to be in a trial are sometimes fairly narrow. Colleen, thank you so much for sharing that. So glad that you were able to find a trial that is working for you. So Colleen is going to share the perspective of somebody who's actively in a trial. So now we just heard from two folks who are the patients who are participating in these clinical trials. We call these folks medical heroes, but then there are also heroes on the side of helping to actually run these trials. So why don't we go over to Christian Ramirez Martinez. Christian, please join us.
Hello. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for Donna and Colleen to share those experiences. Right now, I'm originally from Puerto Rico, and I'm also a severe asthmatic. So when Donna was speaking, I was like, I feel you, because I have severe asthma since I was a child. So I have to take medication every day. So even though I'm working with the research, I'm also a patient. And one of the factors that made me end up working with research is my condition and finding a solution. Started working in clinical trials for different medications. And then I went to med school in Puerto Rico. When I was on my last year of med school, I applied to this opportunity for research in Columbia University for the All of Us research program. It's focused on precision medicine. It's a study that is trying to get information for a huge cohort through the United States. The main purpose is to do genetic testing. Create this cohort, this pool, this biobank, so we can see patterns and see if there's something that it has to do, and it takes into account different factors like lifestyle, your access to healthcare, genetics, and we're trying to see if there is something else that we can do to treat not just a condition, but an individual. So my role is a clinical enrollment manager. So I overview all aspects of the enrollment from the beginning to end: communication with sites, opening sites, supervising staff, data entry, data supervision, etc. But one of the main reasons that brought me to this program is when I read the precision medicine and thinking of my history of asthma since I was a child, I was always asking myself, I have cousins, I have siblings that has the same condition and they're fine. But myself, I have to go to the hospital all the time. And I was like, there must be something in me that is not in them, that is making this condition more severe. So it's good to have this information so we can maybe see if we can add pieces to the puzzle so we can improve medical health and care in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. That's an excellent introduction. Christian is playing a very important role in clinical research. And Christian is one of the wonderful people who are helping people learn about trials and then actually get them into the trials, which is a process all on its own. So I do want to jump over to Cathi Thomas, who also works in clinical research. So Cathi, please tell us about yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. And you're correct. I'm actually a nurse. That's my background, a clinical nurse specialist, and have worked in research for many, many years, primarily with individuals who have Parkinson's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. I function as a research coordinator or a program director around bringing clinical trials to our center. And I'm at Boston Medical Center, which is a large safety net hospital in Boston, obviously. I've worked here for many years and look forward to participating today. Thank you.
I'm going to jump over to a couple of folks who actually work on another side in another important role in clinical research. And these are folks who work at pharmaceutical companies. So we're going to start with Jamie Hu. Jamie, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, thank you for having me, and thank you to the medical heroes for sharing your stories. It's always so moving and touching to hear them. So I work for EMD Serono, and in my role, I work with the study team who designs the clinical trials, and I make sure, or at least try to help them ensure that the patient's voice is embedded into the protocol. So making the study as easy as possible, it is for the patients. Also work with them to help develop the recruitment materials to help enroll the right patients into our study, and then make sure the appropriate steps are built in to help retain them throughout the study. So thank you, Betosh.
Thank you, Jamie. So let's introduce our last panel member, and that is Rodney Winley.
Hopefully last but not least. So hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and thank you, all the patient heroes. And I work for a company called CSL Behring, which focuses on rare and orphan diseases primarily. And my job within that role is I head up our what we call our patient partnerships group within research and development. And my role is to make sure that three main components: that number one, we are able to co-create with patients, give them the opportunity to have input and say into how we develop our clinical trials and our protocols. Number two is transparency, which and inclusion, making sure that patients really understand those protocols from a more simplistic perspective, so that it's clear, there are no hidden agendas. What we talk about and what's going to happen in the clinical trial is actually what happens, and helping patients understand that this is what's going to happen. You can discontinue at any time. Just helping them really get the picture for them and their caregivers. And then rewards and recognition, so making sure that we appropriately recognize the participants and caregivers for the job that they're doing in helping bring these new drugs to everyone else in the world. So, and very interesting, I also come to this panel from the perspective of a caregiver. My brother passed away some years ago, and due to complications from severe immune deficiency, and my father from severe lung disease, and then my mother just recently in December from complications from cancer and diabetes and other factors. And so being that person that had to actually care for them and in an environment where they didn't clearly understand a lot of things, and helping them, being fortunate to work in this industry and help them really understand things that are going on, including opportunities for clinical trials and the benefits there. So I certainly can relate, to all of the patient heroes and the things that you're going through. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Rodney. So I think one point that we can draw from this is, in some way or another, pretty much everybody's lives intersects with clinical research in some way, right? Either yourself or someone that is close to you, family or friend, needs medications or takes medications to help them in some way. And that's the role of clinical research, right? To be able to develop new medicines and treatments for people, and make sure that they actually work for the folks who need it. And we'll just jump into some of the questions here. I'll actually start with you, Colleen, if that's all right. Could you share some aspect of your experience so far with clinical trials that stood out to you, was surprising for you in some way?
Something that was surprising. I don't know if it was so much surprising, but it was certainly welcomed. And that is being in a clinical trial, seeing somebody every 8 weeks, especially when you have a disease that can progress very quickly, was something that was very attractive to me in joining a clinical trial. I suppose surprising is I also feel like I'm supported by a team. So when I go for my 8-week or now 12-week visits, there's an entire team, which is just not the oncology team, but a lot of other resources within the hospital.
So I think somebody was going to join in, please.
No, Colleen, I was just going to ask. So I know that you said you had been to a couple of different places and then landed in Boston. And once you got there, you never left. What was it about Boston and where you are specifically, as compared to some of the other places, that made you feel better about being there? Was the atmosphere, the treatment, the transfer? What was it about it that just really stood out for you?
There were several things that stood out for me. One was, as I mentioned, my disease had metastasized to my brain, which really eliminated me from a lot of studies. So the trial that I'm still in allowed that, and I did not have to have radiation prior to entering the trial. But what really was the underlying reason was the oncologist I met. And even though my prognosis at the time was very poor, she gave me such hope, and it was realistic hope, and she said, I was waiting for my genetic testing to come back. I do have a mutation. And she said, Colleen, there are things we can do. And she was right, there are. So I would say really what drove that decision was not just having that trial available to me, but also the doctor who I have as my oncologist.
If we can stay with you for just a moment, I think, something that's very relevant right now, obviously, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are far-reaching in terms of, many aspects of people's lives. But another area that has been affected, of course, is clinical research. So, being currently in a trial, maybe you can just, share quickly with us what it's been like, what changes you've seen, and maybe what the researchers did to make you still feel, confident about being in the trial.
Right. Well, I recall having a conversation last year, late February, early March, when I was in Boston with my oncologist, asking, should this situation become worse? What is the plan? And they had a plan. They knew exactly what they were going to do. We were going to do telemedicine. They were going to mail me my medication, which was really a big concern of mine because I can't go to a pharmacy and get it. We agreed that if necessary, I would do my scans here in Rochester, which I've done. So when things were particularly bad in Boston during the pandemic, I did scans here in Rochester. When we felt it was reasonable for me to travel to Boston, I would go to Boston. But they immediately knew what they were going to do and how they were going to, continue my care.
So, and now I want to bring Donna into the conversation too. Donna, something that stood out about your clinical trial experience, and if you too want to mention, what the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have been, from your perspective.
Sure. First of all, I would like to say that all of you are my heroes, because working in this to help us with this after being turned down so many times, actually from one clinical trial before the one I ended up being on. If it wasn't for all of you, continuing to care about the care we're receiving and listen to us. And it was something that I think Christian said was about actually listening to treat the individual. And so thank you, all of you, for that. But for my clinical trial, first of all, I was turned down for the first one because I wasn't sick enough yet. I was in the hospital constantly. Every month I had, either bronchitis, and I had pneumonia twice a year. And my clinical trial that I actually finally got on, my doctor fought for me to get on this trial. It made such a difference in my life. And as Colleen said, I would fly. Well, first I started out going from Buffalo. It's a 4-hour trip there and back to Pittsburgh for the infusion, it took like 3 hours to do everything. But I did that for the first 6 months, and then we moved here. And so I flew. In both places, the teams that made you feel so comfortable, and the doctor himself who, took care of you when you got there, they were just so caring and understanding, and they wanted to know about you. How are you feeling? Not only how does this affect you, how's the effect of asthma on you physically, but emotionally, mentally, and your family. It really was like a family. So we got to know each other very well. It was almost 3 years of doing that. And I actually missed it when I didn't have to go anymore, because I missed the care that they gave me. The COVID issue, I had seen my doctor in Pittsburgh during that, and she told me that it could be a death sentence for me because I have severe eosinophilic asthma, and I had to be so careful of everything I did. I stayed at my house in Buffalo for the last 8 months, and my grandkids and my daughters came and visited me outside. But I realized for myself that I had to do everything perfectly the way she told me to do it, and the way the people in charge were talking about, how to wear a mask, stay away, do this. And I had my groceries delivered, and that was it.
Maybe we can go over to Christian, and Christian, you can share, in your experiences helping folks to understand trials and get into trials. How are things maybe a little bit different now because of COVID?
Well, it's interesting. It was already difficult before pandemic because even though in Columbia we make a lot of research, so people are a little bit familiarized, but there's still concerns. There's still concern because of history of not conducting research as we should in the past, and also because we have population that have been underrepresented in medical research. In this program specifically, we are trying to fix that because our research it's not condition specific, it's not population specific, it's everybody 18 years old and older for now, because they're trying to include pediatric in the future. But it's also challenging because it's good that we're trying to include everybody, but since it's not specific, people tend not to identify with the research because people usually look for something that is going to help them directly. Like if I have a condition, there's a clinical trial, I'll go to it. With us, it's more providing information and how this can help communities in the long run and overall as a population. After the pandemic, the concerns grew up. I mean, it was just this media shooting everything, and people believing, choosing, okay, I want to believe this, I want to believe this, and that's it. On the pandemic, we have to switch from recruitment to retention. So this research is going to last 10 years. So it's not only enrolling participants, but retaining them to keep engaged in the program. So we had to make calls. There are some surveys that we're trying to implement in terms of like medical access, medical history, but also NIH implemented surveys that were directly related to their experience with COVID-19. So it's just trying to inform, educate, listen, acknowledge the concerns, having a broad education on the things we have done wrong, acknowledge it, and say, because of this, we're trying to do better now. And I think just education, transparency, as Rodney mentioned before, it's some of the keys that can help us just break these barriers of mistrust. And also for us, having a diverse group of team members. I mean, we have this country that we have a most diverse population, especially in Manhattan. So we're trying our team to integrate as much diversity as we can, because it's shown that it helps a lot in bringing this trust to research itself.
Yeah, Christian, you actually mentioned a very interesting point about COVID and the media, because you have this pandemic and people are already very skittish about in some cases going to different places, going to the hospital, what's going to happen there, and in some cases you have some hospitals that still will not allow like their loved ones or caregivers to go in with the patient, when they actually are admitted to the hospital, and then you have some that actually will, and it's so confusing. And on top of that, the media, as you said, it's like whatever is sensational and has the biggest wow factor impact on the audience, that's what they put out there. And so there's so much information, so much misinformation, and so there's still a lot of confusion. I mean, and we're talking about 13 months now after, because last March, when everything really blew up in early March, then you're talking about 13 months now, and it's still, people are just as confused, quite frankly, as they were 13 months ago.
It's a big challenge. I think as Christian mentioned, it was already challenging to get folks interested in clinical research and help address some of the misconceptions that maybe they have. And now we have to work through a lot of noise and also, very valid concerns about, coronavirus and how folks are going to navigate that, as well as potentially taking part in a trial. But one thing that Christian said that I think is really important for folks to keep in mind, like Donna and Colleen, their involvement in research is disease specific, right? I think that's another point that maybe is lost on the public at large, is you can get involved in research in many different ways. And Rodney, I was actually going to jump over to you on that. Because you mentioned some of the, I think, patient insights research, right? The partnership with the patient community to help make your trials, better for patients. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about that, why that's important to you guys, why it's important for clinical research in general.
Yeah, I think I'll step back and say that why it's important to the patient population in general, and that's because when it comes to inclusion in clinical trials, I mean, you have diversity issues, as Christian has mentioned. I mean, you have knowledge gaps where people don't quite get and understand the benefit of being a part of a clinical trial. For us, we work again mostly in the rare and orphan disease space, so the people who come to us and are part of our clinical trials and support us in terms of the advisory boards that we have, patient advisory boards and stuff, these are people who truly want to make a difference, because there's not a lot out there for their particular disease, and so they want to do something to help out. It's really about, I want to do something to really help people. But unfortunately, I mean, there's a large group of folks out there from a variety of different backgrounds that just, for whatever reason, have been conditioned to think that clinical trials are this negative thing. And they actually, with all the safeguards that are put in place and all the things that are, it's actually a very positive experience it can be. So, I was talking to a gentleman that heads up a minority group last week. And one of the things that we talked about is he said, I would like to do something called turning the corner on Tuskegee. And so, for a lot of African Americans, 60, 70 years later, they still they still know and think about that. And you think about that because it's like 3 or 4 generations since that, but that's still something that's top of mind. And so it's time for people to stop thinking about what's happened in the past and embrace things that are positive that are going on now. From my perspective. So that's a big part of what my company is trying to do overall. It's not about, I want you to think it's a positive experience so you can be a part of our clinical trial. It's, look, clinical research is a really incredible thing. And done right, it really helps a lot of people, and you can be a part of that. It's not a bad situation at all. People care about you. There are a lot of safeguards in place, and we want you just to know, we want you to be involved so you can see for yourself. So as we put clinical trials together, and you put patient advisory boards together, and you have people thinking about, so we wrote this protocol kind of like this. What do you think about that? Does this seem like it makes sense to you? Would you want to do this? And getting that patient perspective. Now what happens is we've written a protocol that if you have the right patients at the table, in an advisory perspective, now you feel more confident in what you're putting in front of people. Because a lot of times writing a protocol and doing a clinical trial, it's difficult. And one of the things that I tell people that are in our industry is, we'll start putting together ideas and trying to innovate about, well, maybe we can do this, that, and the third. And the first thing that comes out of most of the folks that work in clinical research, well, you know what? Yeah, because my aunt had this, or my uncle had this, or my father had this, and so that's where that's what they think about. I have to help people understand. What we are at a fortunate, we're in a fortunate position because we've been doing this for a while. So I can't. One thing that I have to recognize is I can't represent a patient when I'm talking about ideas and representing a clinical trial or how I'm going to reach out to. I can't represent that patient because as much as I want to think that I'm open-minded, I'm not. I'm skewed because I've been in this industry. I know clinical trials. I know what happens. I know different things. And so the benefit that my family gets is that they get the benefit of my knowledge and what I understand, which most of the population does not get. So we can't think about it, like that. And I know I may have gone off the tangent a little bit, but that's okay.
That's perfectly all right, Rodney. I think, it's so great for folks to hear, that perspective. People who work in clinical research, their intentions are always to help patients. That's why they do what they do. And yet I love the fact that, Rodney, you say, essentially there's a limit to how much of the patient perspective we can bring in, right? We want to work together with the community to actually make sure that the research that we're doing does meet their needs, is as easy as possible for them to take part of. I do want to bring in Cathi and also Jamie. So Cathi, and any of these topics that we've touched on that you have a certain perspective on, something else that maybe you'd want to mention and make sure that the audience hears.
Yeah, sure. Definitely around raising awareness, probably one silver lining of the pandemic is that the general population has had an opportunity to be aware of clinical trials as they race to vaccinations. And then what Rodney was sharing, the importance of getting everyone on board related to that, whether, different populations or groups of individuals, have some preconceived, ideas about things. So there's been tremendous publicity about developing vaccinations and the importance of actually utilizing them. So that's one thing for sure in helping awareness. And I think all of you have really talked about the importance of communication. And I know Jamie briefly mentioned when her role is to actually look at the entire plan and how does this impact the person. And one thing that's really important is that communication is critical from every aspect. Certainly respect and gratitude for people participating in trials. So that's one thing.
Jamie, you mentioned that that you sort of like Christian are working a lot in the enrollment of folks into trials. So what are some of the things that you guys have been sort of incorporating, particularly some of the messaging as far as coronavirus's impact, and then just in general, how does that change or not change the approach that you guys take to making people aware about research and getting them into trials?
Yeah. So I think with clinical trials and the coronavirus, I think we were able to come around and do some novel work to get patients enrolled and work outside of the box of the traditional site visits of a patient going into a hospital. We now had the availability of doing telemedicine, which you never saw in clinical trials before, which is a great benefit for patients. Home health visits. So we're doing this in some of our studies where nurses are going right into the patient's home and giving them study drug, doing study procedures, lab collection. So that's another great way of expanding treatment and access to the patients who are in clinical trials, and they're limited to their time going to the site. We've also been able to, as Colleen mentioned in her experience, work with the site and ship the drug right to the patient's home, so they're not missing their medication and their dosing time. So I think a silver lining, that's kind of helped industry move into a more decentralized way of doing clinical trials, which we didn't really do beforehand because there was a lot of regulations in place, and this has helped us shift gears a little and be able to really help our patients in our clinical trials. I agree, diversity and inclusion with this all happening, it's helped raise awareness and it helped do a mind change of how we look and work in our clinical trials and make sure that we're enrolling the right patients and that everyone's being represented in our studies. So it's another nice outcome that I think has occurred because of all of this unfortunate events. It's changing the way we're moving forward.
Yeah, well, it's a very glass half full perspective, right? Mm-hmm. There have been changes in clinical research, I think, as everybody has sort of talked about, that we think actually in the long run is going to be very beneficial. One thing that I did want to ask about, and for this, Colleen, I'm going to come back to you. When you were considering taking part in a trial, who did you talk to? This goes along with the idea of the perceptions that people have. Did you find it easy to have conversations with your family about taking part in trials? Did you have to work against some of the maybe misconceptions that they had?
No, I didn't. Actually, it was very easy. And I think, as I had mentioned earlier, because I had had breast cancer years back, and then I had also worked in the pharmaceutical industry for quite a few number of years, my family already, they were already aware of how I felt about clinical trials, so it wasn't difficult at all. And I think also, again, going back to what my original prognosis was, that my family was very supportive, because obviously we wanted to do everything that they could to increase my survival.
That's so great to hear. That we know that that support system is critically important. Family plays such an important part, as do friends, which is why we always hear that folks, want to have those conversations with them before they decide to take part in the trial. So Donna, I'll ask you the same thing. What was your experiences like having those conversations with family and friends about taking part in the trial?
I had no issue with it. My husband and I decided immediately that we were going to do it. And because they had seen me in and out of the hospital, they'd seen me on my nebulizer and my medications every hour on the hour. so thankful that there was something available that might work. We didn't know if it would work, but we were all, my daughters, everyone, were willing to jump on board and support me with that because they thought, here's something, here's hope. You know, it gave me hope that I could possibly someday live a normal life, because the life I was living was not normal. I couldn't tie my shoes without going to the hospital after trying to do something. So they were so supportive and very excited. They were totally on board. Everyone, my brothers, my mother, everyone. They were thankful that there was some hope.
And so Christian, I'll sort of ask you the same question. You know, speaking from the perspective of someone who works with individuals who are thinking about taking part in the trial, what are some of the barriers maybe that you hear from folks, whether it's, you know, conversation with family or other things? What are some of the barriers that you hear commonly and that you are trying to help them with?
So there's a variety, but mainly because one of our approaches is going to clinic areas in waiting rooms and just reach out to participants, do outreach, inform them. We have some pamphlets that they can read. And sometimes we were having conversations in the waiting rooms, and let's say the companion, the person that were with them, sometimes they make some comments like, oh, don't do that, you're gonna be a guinea pig, or they're gonna sell your information, they're gonna sell your samples. And sometimes it's challenging because you're not only want to help everyone, but you have to educate. And part of the trainings that we are putting in place for our staff is acknowledging some of the issues that Rodney mentioned, like Tuskegee, Henrietta Lacks, and mentioning some things that had come up because of that, like the National Research Act, the Belmont Report. Obviously, you have to tailor your conversation to the audience, and you have to acknowledge what you can say, what terminology to use, and just tailor the conversation. So participants or prospects can have an informed decision. And also, I think education as in everything in life, education is usually the key. It's just maybe you don't have to be an expert, but just looking for information. When you mention guinea pig, what do you mean by that? Do you know there are different steps in research or phases for research? Phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, what each phases means, and just for them to have a sense of what's going on and make an informed and educated decision, and not just because somebody told you, oh, they're gonna sell your information, you're gonna be a guinea pig. Well, let me see, let me read, let me see if that's true. It's just having that, being informed as a staff and as a patient, just having that communication so we can educate each other, because we also have to learn as a coordinator or as a staff, what are their concerns, where they're coming from, and acknowledge that it's a concern, but if you look more into it, it might not be as much a concern as before.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. I mean, look, if you look back through history, you can find every some type of misuse or something associated with clinical research with every aspect of things. If Colleen and Cathi and Donna and Jamie had not, if with all the things that were done to women back in the turn of the 20th century and all those things, and the way that they were abused in terms of clinical research, if Colleen, Cathi, Donna, and Jamie had actually taken that to heart and still been bitter about, they wouldn't be in the situations of either helping patients get in clinical trials or being participants themselves. So they have obviously found a way to overcome those things, look past those things that have happened in the past, and actually look forward to some of the positive things that have come out of clinical trials. And so we just have to figure out a way for other people to do that same thing.
The word that comes up for me, the term is, empowerment, really. The part of our jobs is educating folks, giving them the information, but really what we're doing is we're empowering them to, make a decision for themselves. And on the point of getting more diverse audiences to make sure that that folks who have typically not been a part of research are better represented. It's really, for me, it's that term, do you want yourself and your community to be represented in trials? And the decision is yours to make, right? The information is here, it's clear, it's transparent. That's the important part, as Rodney and others have said. But it's really about helping people make an informed decision for themselves. So I really appreciate that everybody has sort of mentioned that. We do have a couple questions that audience members have put out for us. So why don't we just ask a couple of these here? Can you be paid for participation in a clinical trial? I'm not going to call on anyone specifically. Anyone want to jump in on this one? I know, Rodney, it's sort of your bread and butter.
And Jamie as well.
Yeah, and Jamie as well. But so whoever wants to jump in first, please go ahead.
Yeah. Jamie, you want to?
Yeah, sure. So depending on the study and the sponsor, you can be reimbursed for travel. Sometimes your time spent on site. It depends, like I said before, it depends on the study and how that is set up.
Yeah, and I agree. Same thing. It just depends on the study. A lot of that is at the discretion, in a lot of cases, of the investigator, the site, the place where you're going to actually be a part of the study. They take a look at the population they're trying to bring into the trial, and they understand that certain things need to happen. So, for time, a patient's time is worth something. So I think it's worth, making sure that patients are reasonably compensated for their time, as well as reimbursed for anything that they need to do. And so there are some things that companies are doing to mitigate this. And I know Jamie can talk to this as well, where you have, people like concierge services where, you actually have a company that handles making sure that the patients receive, reimbursement in a timely manner, and or that they receive whatever, for their time and effort that they are, they should receive. So there are a lot of different ways to make that happen.
I wanted to see if Cathi had something to mention here, either on the topic of reimbursement and payment and trials.
Yes.
Also on, how do folks become aware of trials? How are you guys reaching folks? And again, also on the topic of reimbursement.
So on reimbursement, it's always important to know, just as every aspect of a trial is carefully reviewed by ethics boards who approve the trial. So reimbursement, it isn't, it's exactly what Jamie and Rodney shared. It may be to cover some time or transportation, or, being able to get lunch while you're on site for 4 hours. So if there is reimbursement of are being paid, it's pretty much always for those reasons, covering parking. But it's really important to know that all clinical trials have to be approved by your local institutional review board or ethics board, and they carefully address that part, which to make it not seem like you're paying somebody to be in the trial. So that's important. And the second question regarding how we make people aware, it is multi-pronged for trials, and it starts, your recruitment plan starts very, very early on. It's very important, we all know the delays in getting a trial up and running and then having people participate. So to decrease that time, we want to make sure that we have a good, strong recruitment plan very, very early. And it could simply be developing literature that describes the trial, working with this trial sponsor. In our case, we publicize our trials in certain websites, whether it's with the sponsor or advocacy groups. We have a population of people that have Parkinson's disease, for example, in our trials. So we may speak to support groups, we may take time to give a research update, our investigators, or we invite another investigator to do that. So it's informing people that the trial exists. And the other thing which we do spend a lot of time with, and this really talks about barriers, and one barrier we've encountered is that not all healthcare providers actually understand clinical trials.
Very true.
And or may have some biases about that. So we spend some time letting folks who are actually delivering care in the community or wherever to teach them about clinical trials and how important they are and what is exactly involved. And when we do have a person participate in a trial, it is critical that we keep their healthcare provider informed on how they are doing and what is happening throughout the course. So it's always a work in progress for sure.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that you mentioned, it just really resonated, is as you explained the institutional review board, because, you know, we're talking about convincing, helping people understand that things are in a much better place now. And then there are a lot more safeguards in place to make sure that patients are in a safe environment as they you know, participate in trials than previous years. And one of those is that institutional review board, you know, where, you know, the protocol, anything that you are thinking about doing, you know, or messages, anything that's going to be patient facing, the trial overall, it goes through this review, and this board is you know, they take a look at it and they either say, yes, this looks like it's going to be, you know, safe and the messaging is right, patients are going to understand this, okay, or, you know what, no, this looks a little bit too coercive, or, you know, this, that, and the third. And so they actually go back and you know, and push back on the pharma companies and those conducting trials, saying, no, you have to change this before we say it's okay.
There are many different stakeholders, many different sort of groups that have an important role in clinical research, and all of them, as Rodney said, are looking to make sure that the folks who are in trials are protected and as safe as possible at all times. And I think that's so important. You know, one other thing that Cathi mentioned that I don't want it to get lost in the grass here. It's a misconception that folks have that if there's a trial, my physician is going to talk about it with me, but that's not always the case. It's important to work through that conversation. There are, you know, some tools and educational points. As Cathi said, sometimes you have to educate the physicians themselves and the healthcare providers themselves. We have time for one last question, and it's another one important, I think, for sort of the safety of participants and them knowing that you know, they sort of have their autonomy still once they do agree to take part in a trial, and that's whether or not you can leave a trial, and you know, what the process looks like. And I'll invite anybody who sort of wants to join in on this one.
Yeah.
I've been in my trial for almost 6 years, and I have at times considered discontinuing my involvement, only because the drug is now approved and I'm responding, and I have a very good oncologist who I met as a result of the trial. But I think it's important for me to continue. It's still being studied. So the progression-free survival median is still being pushed out. And I'm one of the people pushing it out. So for that reason, I've decided to continue in the trial.
That's awesome, Colleen.
Thanks, Colleen. The answer is yes. With all research, one can withdraw at any time, and that's another ethics board. Important to know that you can withdraw consent at any time during a trial.
The answer is yes, and it's important that usually or most, if we're conducting research, right, that's what we're trying to do, you will be informed of that before you even sign the consent. It's good for general population to know that all of those questions or important aspect of research, it's usually written in the informed consent. When before you sign, you have to read and just be informed again of what's going on, what you can do, what you cannot do. And every time, if you want to withdraw, it's your decision. It's not our decision, it's your decision.
Right, you bring up a very good point, Christian, because that informed consent, and it can be pretty lengthy. So it's really important, from my perspective, and also I know Jamie, can jump in and say the same thing, that we make sure that patients clearly understand that informed consent. We try to write it in a better way so that folks can understand it, but then we also try to provide ways that, different tools to supplement that informed consent. So it's a very short video or an animation. We actually had a study for sickle cell where we actually developed this augmented reality tool. You go in and you pick your avatar, the avatar walks you through every single step of the process, and that supplemented the informed consent. So all those things that you're talking about, freedom to discontinue at any time, what the study actually entails and the length of all that stuff is clearly defined. For those patients, so they can use that along with still having to read the informed consent before they sign it.
Please go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that's incredible. It's so important to let the patient know the steps going through. I love that. I think that's so great. And knowledge is so important because it does alleviate the fear. So I'm so happy that my doctor put me in the trial. And I talk to people all the time about that because it is life-saving. For me, it's life-saving. For many people, it is. And what do you have to lose?
Actually, it's interesting that you're mentioning all the features that we have available for participants to keep engaged. Our program, actually, the consent process, it's online, actually. You will have to create an account, and you have videos with cartoons and features, because visually, sometimes it's better for us to keep engaged, to see some graphics or some visuals. And I think for our research, it has worked very well.
When I did my study, started my study 5 years ago, I didn't get to see any of that. We just got to read it. But I love the fact that this is out there and available for patients today. It's life-changing as far as them knowing what to do, whether to say yes or no, So I thank you for doing all of this to get people into it. I think clinical studies they're a must in today's age.
So with that, I think we are going to wrap up. If folks have any closing thoughts, please feel free to jump in now.
I think that, again, I just want to applaud, Colleen and Donna, and Cathi and Christian and Jamie as well, because she's on my side, and we're all doing these great things to try to make sure that our patients that participate in trials, they understand, hey, it's a totally different animal than what it used to be, decades ago. It's a really positive thing. It can be a really positive experience, and on all sides, we're doing everything we can to try to help people understand that.
And, I would just tag on to that, the silver lining of the pandemic, moving more to telemedicine and decentralizing, I think, again, will only help, accruing into trials. I applaud everybody who's moving in that direction, because I think it will only benefit clinical trial enrollment.
I just want to thank you all, and thank you for this opportunity, this window of information that we can just share our experiences, and this is what we need. This is needed more in our community, in the general media. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for this initiative. You have done a great job. So thank you so much.
So thank you all and CISRIP for hosting this event and continuing to drive the awareness of clinical research. And for me, thank you to the medical heroes for taking the time out of your day to participate in a study. That to me is truly unbelievable. So thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you to the audience for your attention. Thank you to our panelists. We very much appreciate your perspectives. And we do hope that this was helpful for everyone. So take care.
Wonderful.
And
Thank
we'll
you
see you
so
soon.
much from my heart.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you again to all of our speakers for volunteering their time. And we really appreciate all that you do to help improve public health. And thank you to all of you who submitted questions through our chat box. Please be sure to visit our FAQ section linked below the Resource Center for more information. Please take a moment to answer question number 5, true or false. Only people who are sick can volunteer for a clinical trial. There will only be 2 more poll questions throughout the program, so make sure that you're testing your knowledge and you'll be eligible to win some awesome prizes. And now I'm excited to share this educational video from the Johns Hopkins Lyme Disease Research Center to help keep us safe this spring.
Lyme disease is an infection that's transmitted by ticks, and ticks are getting ready to come out now that it's early spring and summer. Over 300,000 new cases of Lyme disease are estimated to occur every year in the United States. That makes Lyme disease the most frequent tick-borne infection in North America. The ticks that transmit Lyme disease, the deer ticks, are very small and they're very difficult to see. They're about the size of a pinhead when they come out in late spring and early summer. My name is Dr. John Aucott. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and director of the Lyme Disease Research Center in the Division of Rheumatology. I'm here today to talk about the 5 tips that you can take home and remember on how to prevent tick bites and getting Lyme disease. The first tip is create a tick-free zone around your house. The first principle in creating a tick-free zone is to have an inner area that is well manicured. Lawns that are well mown and grass that is well sheared will keep the tick habitat away from your home. We want to separate this tick-free habitat from the woods with a barrier, and often what is used is called a tick barrier, which is a several foot wide strip of wood chips or bark that separates your well manicured yard and lawn from the brush and taller grasses that may be around the perimeter of your yard. Ticks get Lyme disease from mice, and so we also want to eliminate the mouse habitats around your yard. This would include eliminating wood piles and rock piles where the mice tend to live and breed. Gardeners may also want to try to keep deer out of their tick-free zone. This can be accomplished with an 8-foot deer fence, and these can be installed by professionals or by yourself. Tip number 2, enjoy the outdoors safely. When you're hiking, stay on the paths and stay in the middle of the paths away from the high grass and brush that may be on the edges of your hiking trail. Avoid going into the tall grass and brush when you're hiking because that's where the ticks are. It's safe to go to sports and athletic fields with well-groomed grass. Just stay out of the brush and tall grass at the edges of the fields. Tip number 3, protect yourself, your children, and your pets by wearing protective clothing treated with tick pesticides and treating your skin with agents such as DEET. These lightweight pants are good for hiking, and being long pants, they prevent ticks from getting on your skin. Long shirts are also important, again, for the same reasons that they prevent ticks from getting on you. Permethrin is a commonly used tick pesticide that's applied to clothing, not to your skin. Permethrin is a unique chemical because it does not need to be reapplied frequently. It actually stays bound to the material of your clothing and needs only to be reapplied every several months. In addition to treating your clothing with permethrin, you can also use different products on your skin to repel ticks. DEET is a commonly used tick repellent that can be applied to the skin safely in adults and children. The DEET must be applied every 2 to 3 hours in warm weather. DEET is easy to apply just by spraying onto the exposed surface of the skin and allowing it to dry in place. When you're done enjoying the outdoors, it's good protective habit to shower immediately. This may wash off ticks that have gotten onto you, and to wash and dry your clothes immediately. It's also important to protect your pets from Lyme disease. It's important to consult with your veterinarian about approved products for tick repellents for your pets as well. It's very important to use protective measures for your children as well. Any kind of pesticides or repellents should be used with caution, and it's important to discuss the use of these with your pediatrician before using them. Tip number 4, perform tick checks after coming in from the outdoors and showering. The most important thing is to get ticks off of you before they attach, and after becoming attached to have the chance to transmit Lyme disease. Tick checks are performed 2 ways. One is by feeling for ticks, because the ticks are very small and sometimes aren't seen. By feeling for ticks, you can actually discover ticks that may be in hidden areas such as behind your knee or in the axilla, where you wouldn't be able to easily see them. Tick inspection should be done as well, looking for the very small pinpoint-sized dark specks that are the nymph stage ticks present at this time of the year. Especially important areas to check for ticks include behind the knees, under the armpits, in the scalp, and especially in children where ticks tend to be in the scalp, along the waistline, and in areas of the back where you may need help from somebody to look on your back for ticks. Tip number 5, remove ticks once found immediately by grasping them with a tweezer and pulling them off of the skin. The quickest way to remove the tick is with a tweezer, to grasp the tick between the head of the tick and the skin and to pull firmly but gently away. Sometimes this will leave behind small black mouth parts of the tick in the skin. This is not to worry. These small mouth parts do not transmit Lyme disease and should be left alone. Never try to dig out the mouth parts of the tick with any type of needle or blade. Just leave them in place and they will work their way out on their own. The most important point is to remove the tick quickly. Removing a tick in the first 24 hours dramatically reduces the risk of Lyme disease and is your best protection in preventing yourself from getting Lyme disease. In conclusion, using these 5 tips to prevent Lyme disease can help you enjoy the outdoors safely, help you to avoid tick bites, and help you to avoid getting Lyme disease.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alcott. Those were some really helpful tips to keep us safe this season. I would like to thank each of you for joining us at Aware for All Northeast. We hope that this is just the start of the conversation. There are a number of resources for you to refer to and continue your learning, starting with the handbook, as well as our Informational Exhibit Center, where you can explore booths from local organizations. You can access the Informational Exhibit Center by clicking on the image below the slides or by clicking on the link in the resource list. All of our event materials can be found at awareforall.org, and they can serve as a guide about information about clinical research here in the Northeast, as well as information about clinical research participation. The 6th raffle question is now up on your screen. How likely are you to tell your friends or family something you learned today? We truly hope you'll share some of these key takeaways. We'll also plan to follow up after today's event with a survey, and we'd really appreciate if you could share any of your feedback as we continue to enhance this virtual version of the Aware for All program. Thank you to the medical heroes in attendance today. Without your gift to participation, we would not be able to conduct new research and discover new cures and treatments. And now for the final poll question. What brought you to the Aware webinar today? You can select all the answers that apply. You are now eligible to win one of the many wonderful prizes donated to us by our local supporters. We will be contacting our winners directly, so please be sure to check your email over the next couple days. Thank you all again for joining us this evening. We can't wait to hear your thoughts about the Virtual Information Center and the webinar in our follow-up survey. We will keep the event page open for a few more minutes before closing out the webinar so that you can visit the Informational Exhibit Center or download the event handbook. We encourage you to visit awareforall.org to access the Informational Exhibit Center and other resources whenever you like. We hope to connect with you at a future Aware for All event, and have a great evening, everybody.